far. 15, 14.
Welcome to The People Make the Places, Mike May and Friends, Episode 16, December 2025. Ambassador Josh wows the people in 3 countries. Join us on a trip down memory lane to Brazil, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Mexico, 1997 to the present. I was accompanied on these trips with family or friends and my 4th seeing eye dog, Josh, a male golden retriever who I got in 1993. He was quite the people magnet. I replay 3 stories in my clone voice, which I wrote for the Sendero blog. Forgive some of the name pronunciations. Ambassador Josh Goes to Brazil by Mike May. Friday, August 15th, 1997. Add a little samba to the words que lindo, and you embody the Brazilian experience with a seeing eye dog. This means how beautiful in Spanish and Portuguese, and this is what I heard from almost everyone I passed or encountered during my 5-day visit to Sao Paulo, Brazil for the International Conference on Education of the Visually Impaired. The public reaction and that of the conference attendees was nothing short of phenomenal. There were over 650 people attending the conference, mostly teachers from 59 countries, a large percentage being from Brazil and South America. Few had ever met a dog guide and its owner, even though they work in the blindness field. Based on their astonishment and gasps as I wound my way through crowded streets and packed reception halls, they were unaccustomed to seeing a blind person walk quickly and independently. For that matter, there were few, if any, cane users walking by themselves. In the exhibit hall and at the large receptions, which had 500 to 1,000 people in attendance, I could not stop without being surrounded within seconds by blind and sighted people who wanted to know about the dog. It was the volume of people and having to give explanations in Spanish, which made this experience an order of magnitude greater than anything I have ever experienced. The blind people wanted to see the dog, the harness, and to feel how he worked. Their Brazilian exuberance added even more color to the situation. The blind teachers wanted to not only feel the dog and harness, but sometimes to experience walking with the dog. Josh, my dog, has now been exposed to various forms of simulation. The person holding my arm, the person walking on the opposite side of Josh at the same time as me, and me walking backwards, holding the leash while they held the harness. There were so many people around that I had no fear of crashing into anything. We only walked a few paces, but it gave them the idea how guiding worked. Oh yes, and then there was the picture taking. It is difficult to communicate how struck these people were by what a dog guide can do. One example might be when a blind professor, Paulo, and his sighted girlfriend asked about the dog. After explaining at length about how the dog works on the streets, in crowds, etc., I had Paulo take my arm, explaining that Josh would lead us toward the stairs to demonstrate what he could do. As we approached the steps at a fast pace, Paulo's girlfriend started to grab us, but she was a pace too far behind to reach us. As Josh halted and we stopped abruptly at the top of the staircase, she burst into tears while seeing Josh doing his job. I could talk to a group, explain how the dog worked, and it would seem that they understood. However, it wasn't until I took my leave and worked Josh through the crowds that they really got the picture. Until then, I think they saw the dog as some kind of fancy ornament or cuddly companion. The blessing of being able to have such independence was in stark contrast with the thousands of blind people around the world who don't have access to a dog guide, a job, or the freedom of movement. The more challenging component of my seeing eye ambassadorial duties came with every restaurant, taxi, and hotel I attempted to enter in Sao Paulo. In the face of a city of 15 million people and some 5,000 restaurants, it was nothing less than daunting, especially because I was on business and not pleasure. My first responsibility was to my business clients. It could definitely disrupt an evening to have a battle over the dog, not to mention having to find an alternate restaurant in a city where walking the streets to find a restaurant aimlessly is not recommended for one's longevity. After a short discussion, we were accepted at our hotel, which I had not informed before arriving, knowing that because of the language barrier that I would likely be rejected. I wasn't so fortunate at their classy hotel restaurant. I was told by the host that I was welcome to eat at the other restaurant downstairs. As it turned out, the menu downstairs was the same and the prices were less, but it was the idea of being sent to the back of the bus, which is so hard to take. It did shake my confidence in my strategy of persistence, patience, politeness, and performance. A bit querulous, the next evening, I called to make reservations at a restaurant which had been highly recommended for a business dinner. The Brazilian proprietor was unconvinced after I struggled over the phone to give my best pitch in Spanish for bringing Josh into his restaurant. After some initial frustration, I called a Brazilian guy who was heading the effort to start a dog guide school in Brazil. I thought it would be useful for him to get a dose of what blind users will be up against in his country. He had given me his home and cell numbers to call if I needed anything. I asked him to call the restaurant proprietor to explain in Portuguese about the dog. There are no laws in Brazil about dog guides, and no one I met knew of a dog guide owner in this vast country of 100 million people. I must say, I cheered after receiving a call back from my new Brazilian friend with the news that there would be no problem. He convinced the proprietor that the dog guide was okay. One down, 49.99 restaurants to go. My new Brazilian friend asked if my mother and I would like to see the guide dog school they were building outside Sao Paulo. He said the drive would be about 90 minutes in traffic, so why didn't he pick me up in a helicopter instead, which would take 15 minutes. This is how you travel when you own the largest pharmaceutical company in Brazil. We landed right at the school and had a tour of the facilities under construction and discussion about what makes a good school. The school was launched and is going strong today. However, I doubt the students get to arrive by helicopter. The next evening, I did not call ahead, but instead arrived with 8 Brazilian guests at a restaurant some of them frequent customers ironically called the Laughing Cat. I think the proprietor finally let us in because we were clogging the entry. He literally moved a wall to give us access to a table in the front. He did not want me walking past the other tables with the dog. After a pleasant, uneventful meal, I was considering how I should make my way to the restroom. I really didn't feel like waiting until I got back to the hotel. It became obvious what direction the restrooms were in after my guests took their turns walking to the facilities at the back of the restaurant and past many crowded tables. The restaurant staff had forgotten Josh was there until I pushed back my chair, and he quickly guided me through the tables and into the restrooms at the rear. The staff did not have time to stop me, but they complained to my colleagues, "Wait, how will he find the restroom? How will he find the toilet? How will he find his way back to the table?" Within a matter of minutes, their questions were moot as I found my way back. My colleagues, half of whom were blind Brazilians, were thrilled by the example of independence I set. Now for the coup de grace. I was at the hotel for 5 days, and the staff had been extremely friendly and solicitous. When the downstairs restaurant was closed for renovation, I calmly walked into the fancy upstairs restaurant for breakfast, where I had been rejected merely 5 days before. This time, I received excellent service and no issue with my dog. This was the one restaurant to which I'd been denied access previously. The 4 Ps paid off, especially the performance, the example we set via our various comings and goings while staying at the hotel. I decided to take advantage of my newfound seeing eye dog converts at my hotel by asking them not only to make dinner reservations for me on my last night, but to explain about the dog to boot to the restaurant. This strategy worked. We had our best meal of the week. I signed the largest client ever and prepared to leave Brazil for Chile, batting 1,000. A footnote about the taxis. By and large, they were very good about accepting the dog, probably no worse than in the States. I just couldn't force the issue if they refused without the laws to back me up. The drivers I rode with were extremely helpful in making sure I found my final destination, even to the point once of staying with me for nearly a half an hour at a convention center in search of a meeting. Upon arriving in my next destination in Chile at an international Sonesta hotel, I was a bit perturbed when I was told that the hotel policy did not permit pets. I had run out of patience. I thought that just maybe at an international hotel I wouldn't have to do the dance yet again. I gave all the standard explanations, and the chief of the hotel reception said he would speak with the general manager. I am not sure if he actually did, but he returned to tell me it would be impossible to accommodate me with the dog. You mean to tell me that the Sonesta intends to discriminate against me and inconvenience me by having to move to another hotel? I would like to speak to the general manager myself. It turns out that although there is not a dog guide rule in Chile, that a human rights law had been passed just 2 months ago, so the general manager was a bit sensitive to the word discrimination. I guess they realized I was not going to leave without a fuss. By the time the general manager appeared, they had changed their tune radically. As it turned out, I received not only admittance to the hotel, but VIP treatment for the next week in the Sonesta. The bottom line is that persistence, politeness, patience, and performance pay off, whether in countries which have the benefit of dog guide laws, and especially in those which do not. Common human dignity dictates that blind people trying to travel independently with their dog guides should receive professional customer service, not resistance, every step of the way. These episodes continued throughout my stay in Chile, although it was somewhat easier being in a place where I could communicate better. It sure makes me appreciate the public awareness of dog guides in the United States as well as the laws which back us up. Nonetheless, I would like to see blind people in places like Brazil and Chile have the option of a dog guide and the opportunity to travel independently and without resistance. There has to be a more effective way to create public awareness than me eating my way through the continent. Ambassador Josh next went with me on a business trip to San Juan, Puerto Rico for the Veterans Association annual meeting. I was accompanied by my first wife and our 2 little boys, staying at a big resort hotel right on the beach. I wrote this for the Sendero Group blog in the very early days while testing a backpack-worn GPS. Even then, it was exciting to hear about nearby points of interest, including the parasailing adventure, which I tried for the first time. No, Josh did not join me in the parachute. I talk about relieving Josh at the Chicago airport. This was before 9/11 when we used to be able to relieve the dog on the tarmac. Ambassador Josh and Seymour the Cane team up with Mike in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Saturday, August 21st, 1999. In past travel articles, you may have joined my seeing eye dog, Josh, and me on our trips to Brazil, Chile, and Mexico, or when Seymour led the way in Ireland while Josh stayed home in California. The essence of those travels, along with this new one, is the people more than the places which make the trip interesting and the people who make the trip challenging. In this excursion, join me for this trip with Josh and Seymour to San Juan, Puerto Rico, a place full of personality and vibrant people. The occasion for this trip was the Blind Veterans Association annual convention held at the San Juan Grand Beach Resort and Casino. Leave it to those men and women who fought hard to know just where to party hard. Right on the beach, a swim-up bar in one of the several pools, complete with cement bar stools, live music everywhere, 5 restaurants in the hotel, and all the amenities you can imagine in such a place. I made sure to arrive a couple days early to give myself ample time to learn my way around. Within the hotel complex, it didn't matter too much whether I was using a dog or cane. The main consideration was my dog's well-being. No sense having him sit next to the pool roasting in the sun while I cooled off. It was a little tricky, however, negotiating lounge chairs and pools in a noisy environment when using a cane. The staff jumped to help at the slightest provocation, like when I inadvertently walked through a wedding party taking pictures and paused to figure out where I was. I decided the first night to have dinner in one of the hotel restaurants, Giuseppe's. When the maitre d' hustled me into a side room, I was sure it was because of the dog, but decided not to make a fuss. I was happy on a Friday night to get a table quickly. I opted for a pretty light meal when it turned out a non-alcoholic fruit drink was $15. When I paid the tab, the waiter lowered his voice and said, "Mr. May, we have a dress code which requires long pants. I thought I would let you know for next time." I didn't want to say there probably wouldn't be a next time, but I now understood that it was me, not the dog, which got us relegated to the side room. On a day trip to Old San Juan, I decided to cane it. First, we went to El Morro, a 300-year-old fort with 30-foot thick walls. There were lots of interesting structures and cannons to touch. I got a good feel for the enormous size of the place by walking up and down hundreds of steps on multiple terraces. The old city of San Juan was, as you might picture, with sidewalks from 2 to 4 feet wide and bumpy cobblestone streets wide enough for one car. When I swung my cane too wide, I would tap a passing car. definitely enough of a surprise to make the heart skip a beat. As I experienced in Dublin, the standard cane catches constantly on the cobblestones. The crowds are so thick that I choked up on the cane and stayed on my toes. The smells are extreme, stinky odors, leather shops, perfume shops, and cooking foods. No sensory underload in this profuse environment. I found myself occasionally feeling the walls I was passing just to check them out. Everything moved slowly enough that it didn't feel intimidating. Nothing like I experienced in the old city of Toledo, Spain, where I thought I would be run over for sure. One of the great smells I investigated turned out to be a fantastic local restaurant called El Bombonero. The service was brusque, but the food was great. It was a local rice, beans, and chicken joint. They called the beans habichuelas instead of frijoles, as I was accustomed to hearing. The local ambiance also made me feel like I found something special. The next day, I took Josh on an outing to the Caribbean National Forest, about 45 minutes east and south of the hotel, which is on the north coast of the island. The elevation rises to nearly 3,000 feet, and the temperature drops probably into the high 70s. Like most of Puerto Rico, Hurricane George hammered El Yunque rainforest in September 1998. Some sites were closed for renovation, but it was incredible walking along a path cut in the dense foliage where a rabbit could hardly penetrate. According to our guide, there are no poisonous snakes in Puerto Rico, something I found comforting in such tight quarters. There are only 48 Puerto Rican parrots still in existence, few if any in the wild. The coqui frog, only found in Puerto Rico, makes a two-note chirp more like a bird than your typical croaking frog. It was a wonderful feeling to be winding my way through this forest, guided expertly by Josh, feeling and smelling this incredible habitat for plants and animals I had never met. After 3 hours in the El Yunque rainforest, we returned to sea level and found a surprisingly good lunch at a fast food chicken, rice, and bean place. It has the kids' play area just like McDonald's, but the food is much healthier. Returning the 20 miles to the hotel, it felt great to jump in the pool and to languish in the gentle ocean waves. The pool's a bit too noisy and disorienting for my tastes, so I walked the 100 yards to the beach and floated around chatting with a business colleague just beyond the breakers in one of the less orthodox business meetings I have experienced. Funny how dragging your toes through the sand and bouncing with the swell of each wave brings inspiration to a meeting, definitely an idea I will put in the anonymous suggestion box at work. After 4 days of working our booth exhibit and business meetings, I was ready for a little adventure. I strolled down the beach a couple 100 yards to the water sports concession. When I inquired about parasailing, the proprietor didn't hesitate a minute before taking my $45. I am accustomed to having to cajole or even battle when trying a new sport, like the last time I was attached to a parachute 16 years ago when I went skydiving. That took me a couple years and dozen jump schools before finding one which would accept me. Parasailing turned out to be pretty tame, although there was quite a thrill not knowing just how it all worked. The explanation I got was all of 2 minutes, so it wasn't until I did it that I understood the equipment and the experience. We first took a small motorboat out to a 31-foot larger boat anchored offshore. This larger boat had a platform about 8 feet square at the stern. There was a large parasail attached to a rope, which was connected to a winch on this platform. I donned a harness around my waist, which had 2 nylon straps that connected to the chute once I was squatting in position on the platform. Once I was situated, they let go of me and started reeling the rope out while the boat moved forward at only about 12 knots. I was dangling in a sitting position, slowly rising into the air as they let the rope out. I could hear the wake from the boat below me and the engine of the boat getting fainter as I rose higher and higher. At the final height of 300 feet, I was pleased not to be able to hear the engine any longer. They honked the horn twice to let me know the rope was at its full length of 600 feet. I found that by turning my head to the side, it got quieter. I also thought about how spooky this must look to a sighted person. I pictured the distant mountains to the east and the ocean bending over the horizon to the north that they might be seeing, not to mention the tops of the hotels nearby. It was very peaceful, especially as I relaxed, swinging gently in the harness, just an occasional hissing of the air through the chute. I couldn't hear the boat wake or engine at all. Only feeling the taut straps connected it to the chute that I was certain I was still connected. Since we were only a few miles from the San Juan airport, I wondered as I heard a jet taking off just how far I was out of their flight path. Only the jets and me up there and probably a few seagulls. It was pretty cool. Most of my apprehension was about landing on the platform. When they reeled me in, they assured me it was no big deal. And it wasn't. They had obviously done this a million times with a variety of people, so I touched down quite easily. Amazing to not even get a toe wet. For some odd reason, I thought I should have brought my cell phone with me and called someone when I was up there. This is the way your mind works when you don't get away from work enough. The one big challenge of my trip was on the flights home when I attempted to relieve Josh at the Chicago airport. My customary routine is to have the gate agent take him to the foot of the jetway stairs, and he does his business on the tarmac in about 30 seconds. Not so easy this time. The request went all the way up to the airport shift boss, and he insisted that I must go all the way across the airport to the grass outside baggage claim. This is literally a mile and several escalators away. I was very ticked at this unreasonable request, as I had been through Chicago scores of times before without running into this ridiculous regulation. Since Josh had been on the flight from Puerto Rico for 5 hours, I had no choice but to run for it. This is when being a blind athlete comes in handy. I made it outside and back 5 minutes before the airplane doors closed. I was tempted to be late in returning and see if they would hold the airplane for me. I could have easily not made it in time, and many blind travelers wouldn't be prepared to run 2 miles to relieve their dog. You can bet the United management is going to hear about this one. So, who are the people I will think of when I picture Puerto Rico? The parasailing guys who so respectfully took me on my first flight, the taxi driver Gladys who took me everywhere I needed to go and conversed patiently with me in Spanish, Alpidio Roland, a very active blind guy, blinded in Vietnam, who rounded up 30 to 40 other blind folks for an informational technology presentation at the regional library, Mike Nigelberg, an 81-year-old vet from LA who gave me a piece of his mind about how there should be longer pauses between words without slowing down synthetic speech. Don Garner, blinded in Korea, one of the most senior people at the VA. We got soaked in the rain together. Eric and Lynn Damery, whose kids hung out with mine at the beach while we were working. Jose Ocasio, a blind guy who heads the Disabled Students Program at the University of Puerto. Rico owns a rehabilitation technology business along with his charming wife, Janet. Jose is also involved in goalball and other sports. After we had a fantastic meal together with our families, Jose said to me, "Mike, I feel like I've known you for a long time and will know you for a long time to come." I felt the same way and very fortunate for the opportunity to make this personal connection. I look forward to the day Jose, Alpidio, or one of these folks visits me and I can reciprocate the hospitality and the experience. I will certainly have fond memories of Puerto Rico because of them. Thanks, Mike and Embajador Josh. One more trip, this time to Mexico for work and play. I reference a 1980s trip to Mexico with my dog, Toady, and my roommate and Dutch friend, Joost, who has become a leading human rights advocate and expert on the Middle East. I have memories of being on a 36-hour bus ride from Guadalajara, and Joost was reading me the Russian author Dostoevsky. The other thing I remember was sneaking onto a bus in Mexico City because the previous bus driver wouldn't allow my dog on the bus. When the new driver took a coffee break, we jumped on the bus and took a seat with the dog under our legs and a jacket. We rode for 14 hours without being discovered. When we got off the bus and the driver saw the dog, he went ballistic, but we had gotten where we needed to be. Joost and I had a blast traveling together. We decided to skip the return bus and to fly home. I've had several other trips to Mexico, hosted by various hospitable friends and colleagues. My great-grandmother was from Monclova, Mexico. I've been on 2 family trips to Puerto Vallarta and now go there regularly with my wife, Gina. Ambassador Josh goes to Mexico Thursday, January 6, 2000, by Mike May. What a pleasant surprise to arrive in a Spanish-speaking country expecting the usual resistance to bringing my seeing eye dog into public places, and nothing happened. Nothing like Chile or Brazil. Nobody said anything other than the ubiquitous "Que lindo," how beautiful. It was particularly nice to be working Josh again after caning it in the United Kingdom the week before. It turns out that Mexico passed a law a few years ago specifically requiring the admittance of dog guides in public places. This law was passed in conjunction with establishing disabled parking regulations. Nonetheless, Josh had some interesting challenges in Mexico City. In a city of nearly 20 million people and 7 million cars, there is terrible traffic, non-functioning signal lights, cars on the sidewalks, broken sidewalks, and inconsistent terrain. There were not as many loose dogs as I expected, and yet every time I entered a store or restaurant, there was seldom any question about being allowed to bring Josh inside. This is in stark contrast with my last visit to Mexico City 17 years ago when I had to sneak my first dog, Toady, onto a bus to Oaxaca. Our host in Mexico took us on a fascinating afternoon boat, chalupa, trip among the ancient canals of Xochomilco. This was a flat boat with a picnic table in the middle. It was propelled by a guy standing at the back, pushing us along with a 15-foot pole. Other chalupas had floating musicians, floating restaurants, vendors, and even picture takers. The unique story of how these canals were formed and the quiet movement of the chalupa was the best part of this excursion. I did try my hand at poling the boat, which gave me great respect for the Mexican poler who propelled us for 3 hours. Not much for Josh to do, but lay under the table, although the occasional great heron got his attention. Josh did get a workout guiding me up the 800 or so steps to the top of the Pyramid of the Sun in the ancient city of Teotihuacan. This was not quite as treacherous as some hiking we have done in the Sierra Nevada mountains, but it was tricky. The thing that is amazing about these unusual kinds of guiding experiences is that the dog must employ modified guiding techniques which are demanded by unusual circumstances like very narrow stairs requiring an almost single file approach. Descending some of the steepest sections was particularly precarious. Josh was, of course, going down head first, and while he was guiding me, I was supporting him with the harness from a nosedive. We tramped around through broken rubble and ruins and through the museum. There is one room which has an entirely glass floor, which is a couple feet over a small model replica of the ancient city. This is where Josh drew the line. He was not going to take responsibility for me stepping out into what looked like thin air. He was willing to heel somewhat reluctantly, but he would not guide me in this room. Although touching the original stone carvings in this museum is strictly forbidden, one guard personally showed me a whole wall of carvings. At the Archaeological Museum back in Mexico City, blind people are allowed to touch some of the pieces if prior arrangements are made. It is mind-boggling to imagine the incredible amount of work and artistry which went into the stone carvings. It is awe-inspiring to be touching something which was touched by other human hands 2,000 years ago. I was told that there are about 100 dog guides around Mexico City, and I saw a dozen or so during my visits and presentations. Apparently, the Purina Foundation pays for a half-dozen blind Mexicans to go to Leader Dog along with an interpreter for the group. I met one woman with a dog from the Guide Dog Foundation. She spoke English very well. I also met a couple dogs and their owners from the Mexican Dog Guide School. They seemed fine, the little I saw of them, but other people told me that the dogs in training are a bit weak yet. They were proud to announce that they are the first dog guide school in Latin America. I was most impressed by the fact that they had passed a dog guide law and that public awareness was good enough that one could travel freely in Mexico City. It did help being able to speak Spanish, as not everyone understood right away that Josh was a perro guía and not just a pet on a stroll. The highlight of my trip, other than the new friends I made and two of our Mexican hosts, was a visit to Comité por Ciegos, a rehabilitation center which serves about 350 blind people each year. They only scratch the surface of the 2 million blind people in Mexico, but they are nonetheless making a difference in a country where there is no public funding for the blind. I had a heart-to-heart talk with a class of 25 blind young adults about the barriers we all face in social and career development. We discussed issues like, aren't blind people in the United States all rich and taken care of? It seemed to bring us together when I explained that my own upbringing included a broken home with 5 children and a mother who was working and going to school at the same time. I felt that I did inspire them, and the next day, I was able to go a step further by appearing on Hoy Mismo, a national TV show seen by 30 million Mexicans and throughout the Spanish-speaking world. Josh did his part by laying at my feet quietly and looking beautiful, que lindo. As I fly back to California, an exemplary seeing-eye dog at my feet, riding on my talking laptop, dressed in an expensive suit, with a good job and family awaiting me, that I am more than just a little fortunate and that I can't return too soon to share my good fortune with the blind people of Mexico. I am reminded, too, that there was a day when dog guide access was not so easy in this country, thanks to Buddy, the first seeing eye dog, and his master for blazing the way years ago. Wonderful trip to Mexico and many more to come. Thanks to Ambassador Josh for his diplomacy, fabulous guiding, and companionship. Every trip is richer because of the people I met, like servers, drivers, flight attendants, and random people on the street. Special recognition to our hosts in all three countries, including those I met around adaptive technology, like the Laramara Foundation in Brazil, Roberto Diaz del Campo, his daughter Harubi, Roman Suarez in Mexico, and Jean-Paul Oaxaco in Chile. The background music included Dulce Pontes, Luis Miguel, and Jesse and Joy. I have always liked the Spanish phrase, hasta siempre. Until always, I leave you with that sentiment. Please share and rate the podcast. Here's a bit more music reminiscent of Brazil, San Juan, and Mexico.
Dime cómo hacemos. Si tú me deseas, yo a ti también. Hace rato te quiero comer. Di qué vas a hacer. Así que ponme un dembow que se no respeta. Tengo pa' ti la combi completa. Que no duró mucho soltera. Aprovechame.